is Rebecca Long-Okura. I am an attorney in Salt Lake City. I'm not from Utah, I'm from Pennsylvania, and I went to law school in Washington, D.C. I've been practicing family law for a little over 20 years. And somehow I managed to make it through high school, undergrad, and law school without a stitch of Latin. And I didn't really feel the pain of that at all. It's just not taught, in the regular curriculum anymore. But then about 10 years ago, when I turned 40, I realized that I had been saying to myself that I wanted to learn Chinese for about 10 years, but I hadn't done it. So at 40, with a brand new baby, I started studying Chinese, and I did it by doing 5 lessons a week through tutors online. And, I've only been to China one time, but I have intermediate fluency. And that's when I started to realize that even at an older age, even after careers had already been firmly entrenched, that just for pleasure, I could learn languages and do something I wanted to do. And I always wanted to read Chinese poetry in the original, because you lose so much when it comes to poetry or even prose when you have to go through an interpreter or have to go through a translator. So I really, really wanted to learn Chinese. So of course, this then led to, well, wait a minute, I could learn Latin and read I could read Cicero, I could read the Humanists, I could read medieval text. I just need to apply myself to Latin. So I started looking online and I found the Ancient Languages Institute. So and it's been great. It's been way better than the Chinese experience.
So that's funny. You're not the first attorney we've had sign up to learn Latin and really, really kind of dive into it and enjoy it. Is there anything about your study or practice of law that made you that turned on the Latin switch in your brain?
In a way, yes, not in the very direct way of, oh, I'm an attorney, Latin's important, in the way that maybe a medical student would make that parallel, but more in the way that, at least my way of looking at being an attorney is that being an attorney or being anything really, if you want to do it well, is more about being informed about the world. And so I really kind of strongly believe in a more liberal arts, wide-reaching education. And so I think that by being an attorney, through education, realizing that education really does lead to a more human, wider perspective, that I think that these days, my daughter, for example, she's 11, so what does she know? But she says things like, what is college for? What do you need college for? Why go to college? I can just learn a trade. I can just learn how to do this thing. I can just be like all these programmers who just taught themselves to be computer people, and that's what they do. And there is a place for that, and that's wonderful. But then there's some of us who are like, no, I like education for the sake of education, for what it builds for me as a person.
Right.
And so in that way, I think that there is a parallel between being an attorney and learning Latin. But it's kind of abstract.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that's interesting. Because there's been a few who are in a similar, I think, life stage too as well, attorneys who are like, I kind of always wanted to. It's not really my job, but it kind of feels related in some kind of abstract way.
It could be that we just, at this point in your career, you just start to get so sick of being a lawyer that maybe hobbies just start to take on way more power in your life.
Right. So you learned Chinese on the internet, and now you're learning Latin on the internet. You said this one's going pretty well with ALI. Why is it going well? Why do you like it?
Well, I would say that I'm a dismal Latin student at this point in the game. It's really, it's a challenge, right? But what I really like is this methodology is so great. I can't imagine where my Chinese would be if there had been a parallel to the Lingua Latina text.
Yeah.
I just, it's a shame, really, that not every language has this kind of core comprehensive text that really walks you through a ton of vocabulary, all of the grammar, and is based in historical like reality, so that you're in a certain time and a certain place. I feel like with my Chinese online learning, it's been a real disorganized, for me at least, mental process where I never know what's coming at me. Sometimes I'm speaking well, sometimes I'm reading well, but there's no organized way of doing it. And in part, that's just the nature of online learning often, is that it's very scattershot. But this process is not. It is clearly proceeding. Every chapter is building on the prior chapter. And all of my professors in the Ancient Language Institute have been amazing people.
No, that's great.
Yeah. And they're also relentless. They will not speak English if they can say it in Latin. And there's really a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, the Lingua Latina book, I'm really grateful for it, because I think without the example of Orberg, who wrote it, Latin education would just be way behind where it is now. Jonathan Roberts, my colleague, he says, yeah, I've never found any book as good as Lingua Latina for any other language.
No other.
We teach Greek and Biblical Hebrew as well, and he knows Spanish, and I learned French, and I'm like, yeah, there's nothing this good for anything else.
It's excellent. And it couples so well with the Picta Dicta, the Saint, what is it, Saint Anthony, Saint Andrews, whatever.
The Saint Andy's Latin Companion, the digital textbook.
The digital, and then with the vocabulary builder, and then the weekly lessons. I think the other thing is, when I have been studying Chinese with 5 lessons a week, it's great because you get a lot of contact with the language, but you have no time to actually do the deep dive by yourself. You can't you'd have no time with the material because you're just going to another class. But, and I've got a kid to raise, a law firm to run, those kind of things. So there's, it's busy. But with this, kind of at my own pace, but I have to get it done, is proceed through that chapter for the next class. So, it is really interesting. Each week I can see some students in the class kind of shoot ahead. And then maybe the next week, different students shoot ahead, and everybody's doing it together, but at their own pace. So it works really well.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well as a student in Greek, because I did Latin back in the day with Jonathan, but never did Greek. And now I'm a ALI student also in beginner Greek.
Awesome.
And I've noticed a similar kind of, everyone's more or less keeping pace, but certain people are picking up certain things faster, and then other people catch up.
Right. It's kind of nice to watch. And it also lets you feel like, sometimes one week I was just so confused that I actually could feel myself starting to panic and be like, I should not be here. I have no idea what's going on. And then the next week I felt like I had command of the material. So, it's really about persevering. You can't give up when the going gets rough, because it just does. The Orberg book is fantastic, but it is a lot of material. And if you let yourself get overwhelmed, you'll quit.
Yeah, it's steep, and you have to keep taking the steps. And I really believe sometimes your brain is working things out, while you're driving or sleeping, and then you wake up the next day, and all of a sudden the chapter's a lot easier for some reason. It's like you didn't do anything.
Well, and just the last week, Logan, or 2 weeks ago, I was just confusing myself about what turned out to be a really simple concept, but for some reason I just kind of forgot or combined 2 ideas. And so I asked him about it, and he was just really great at separating the idea back out into its proper places. Like, how does this really work? And it was not complicated, but having that teacher be there to clarify the material, because you can really get kind of yourself in a little bit of a jumble, is really, really helpful. And that the teachers have always made themselves available by email and whenever you need them, really.
Great. Well, finally, looking ahead, you mentioned Cicero. What are you most looking forward to in your Latin education? What is your big goal? What's kind of keeping you motivated when you feel like you want to quit, and then you remember?
Well, the good, yeah. Well, remember why I'm doing this to myself, right?
Yeah.
Really, the good thing about not being a student anymore, not being a college student, not being a law student anymore, is that I don't need those kind of big goals the way I used to. I love antiquarian books. And so I don't know how I'm going to use this necessarily. Yes, there's some classics that I would love to be able to read in the original. But I also love the idea that I can just walk over to a book that I've collected because of its amazing binding, or because of who the author is or who the printer was. And I can pick it up and I'll be able to read it because it's a language that I've put the time in. So I don't know exactly what that will look like, but the freedom of thought that it will enable is what I'm looking forward to. Because truly crunching through Chinese right now, after now 11 years, I can't really just pick it up and read. But I see that with Orberg, even when I just pick up one of the books I already have that's in Latin, I can make a lot more sense out of it than I could a year ago.
That's awesome.
So, it's pretty cool.
Well, thanks so much, Rebecca. Anything else you want to share really quickly before we jump off?
I would just, if your idea is to have people look at a video where they're trying to see whether or not this works for them, I think that a lot of people are afraid to learn online. They're used to a classroom environment, and somehow maybe not post-COVID, maybe we're also accustomed to it at this point. I don't know if it's really a thing, but this would have never been possible. Like, I couldn't take the time out of my work schedule or my home schedule to go learn Latin. Like, I couldn't take the time to drive to the university and sit there for a class and do it in that manner. So it's such a gift, really, to the world that something like the Ancient Language Institute exists, because we can now just log on, get my cup of coffee on a Saturday morning, sit there with some fun people for an hour and a half, and do something that I've always wanted to do. It's amazing.